Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson, and welcome to our course, Site Management, Supervision, and Inspections. This is Lecture 6B, and in this lecture we're going to be looking at negotiations. We talked in 6A about meeting types, and now we're going to be talking about negotiations, especially negotiations as applied in construction projects. So we'll think about negotiations. Really, pretty much every time you're communicating, we're all negotiating. We're actually all selling, and we're all negotiating all the time. You could be negotiating with your kids about when they have to go to bed. You could be negotiating with your spouse about where you're gonna go to dinner. You could be negotiating with your boss about leaving early. There could be a lot of different things that you are negotiating on, and it tends to require some compromise by all parties. There's always a little bit of give and take that goes on when we're negotiating. Really, the goal is to resolve some sort of issue that may be occurring. And it can be also influenced by positions people tend to take or entrench themselves in very often. And it can start right from the project onset. So, in the previous lecture, we talked a little bit about meetings and partnering. Really, you're trying to build some good relationships and set some ground rules early on. Makes it easier if there tends to be disputes, that you can clarify things. And it's also much easier if you built a relationship with somebody to be able to work out some differences. It sometimes can be a little bit more difficult if you haven't had that opportunity to do that. So when people hear the word negotiation, sometimes they think about high-powered deals being hammered out, countries negotiating to prevent the outbreak of a war, free trade agreements, NAFTA or whatever it is that we're calling it now. It seems like it's always under some sort of microscope. Union contract negotiations, York University tends to have some conflicts in their negotiations. Ontario colleges, the last contract broke down and there was a strike for a period of time. So we think of those. We might also think about Toronto Raptors a little while back and winning the championship, and then Kawhi Leonard negotiating with different teams about where he was going to go or where he's going to stay. And so these kind of things go on and on and on, and it's negotiation, right? And they can be tense, they can be tough, and often the stakes are pretty high. Not so high on the little things, like I said, that negotiate when your kids can go to bed or that sort of thing. But sometimes the stakes can be pretty high. They can make pretty significant differences. And in construction projects, they can be literally for millions of dollars very often, depending on what's being negotiated. Claims, as an example. So good, bad, or indifferent, we all do negotiate, and this is an ongoing process. So some of us get better skilled at it than others. And like I said in a previous lecture, if you work at something, you're going to get better at it. So if you're not very good at negotiating, that doesn't mean you can't get a lot better at it. So it's a way of getting what you want within reason from others. It's not dictatorship. It's trying to get something within reason from others. And hopefully, if we do it successfully, at the end of the day, it's going to add value to both parties. So we try to satisfy someone else when they control what we want, perhaps. Negotiating a contract, the client has to determine if you're going to get the contract. So they have control over whether you get this project. You have control over the price that you're willing to do, or the conditions you're willing to work under, or the time frame that you're willing to do it in. So really, it's trying to get a mutually beneficial deal that, we negotiate this construction project and the client agrees. And so we've set a time frame and a budget and quality expectations that are mutually beneficial, that we believe we can deliver on, and the client will pay us when we do deliver on it. You can classify negotiations generally, and people that negotiate, into two areas. And, everything's not always cut and dry, and sometimes it depends what you're negotiating. But people have certain personality types in the research on negotiation. And there's what we'd call soft negotiators and hard negotiators. And a soft negotiator wants the deal. They don't want to really wreck a relationship, so they're very sort of soft spoken about it. They may give too much, and then once the deal is done, they may have buyer's remorse. Why did I do that? Now I'm stuck with this, and they regret it. And then that can affect the relationship with whoever they accepted the deal with, and then the next deal probably won't go so well, or if it goes at all. Hard negotiators, it's kind of like it's a competition. I win, you lose. And so if you're a hard negotiator, it's like, who can I step on to win this? And you can probably think of people that you could identify with being a hard negotiator. It's all about them, and it's a win-win kind of situation generally. So you know what? They typically do win a lot of individual deals, and so that they see as a very positive. But they also lose a lot of long-term relationships. So it's kind of that old term, they win the battle, but they lose the war. And we've talked about the 80-20 rule, Pareto's law, that 80% of your clients are repeat clients. You want to maintain that. But if you're going to be putting yourself in a position because you win these deals and the clients aren't happy, then maybe it's only going to be 20% of your clients are repeat clients. Well, you know what? You're losing in that case, because you're losing the lost opportunity. There's the opportunity cost of all those clients that you lost unnecessarily. So, and that's an economic term, the opportunity cost, the loss of all those clients that you could have had business with. Which is significant, usually significant. It means you got to keep trying to go out and get new clients, and you got to do it by, being a hard negotiator. Not the best sort of setup for long-term relationships. Same thing with a GC, negotiating with subcontractors. I can win with a subcontractor that I've already contracted over some little item or some item that I can win on, but I'd be much better if I can work this out with them, that it's mutually agreeable where possible. It's not always going to be where possible, but a hard negotiator, they're always trying to win no matter what. So take a minute. What's your natural style? Self-reflect. Are you a hard negotiator or a soft negotiator? We'll get into other types of negotiator, but where's your natural tendency, hard or soft? My natural tendency tended to be soft. So I think it's evolved over time. Definitely practicing a number of negotiation things that I've learned over the years has sort of resolved that. And some of you, if you're thinking about it, you might say it depends. And yeah, you might be right. You might get into a negotiation to buy a car, and this is, you only buy a car once every 10 years, so it's not likely you'll be with the same salesperson again. So you might be pretty hard line on what it is that you want to get out of this agreement. And you might be completely different if you're negotiating with your boss or a client or subcontractor, as an example. And it's a cultural background. Where did you grow up? You go to some countries, it's just a certain natural bartering that goes on in the open markets and that sort of thing. Having traveled a lot myself, I know. And so there's a little bit different way of viewing things. And it tends to be a fairly sort of seemingly hard line, but underlying it's just kind of a cultural sort of practice. But you have to remember, though, what's the culture of the people I'm negotiating with, and what's their view of my tactics and my strategy. And if it's pretty negative, that might not reflect well on you getting more work in the future. So the better, when we think about our skills and improvement, the better we become, the more we can get done in less time. And if you consider looking at it from both viewpoints, and we talked about how to win friends and influence people, and looking at things from the other person's perspective can be very, very helpful when you're entering into negotiation. Very often in negotiation, there's what they call positional bargaining, where one side takes up a position. They take up a position and they're not moving from that position. I could say that very often it happens in politics. We see it right now, the polarization in the United States, right? You got the Democrats and you got Republicans, and they get certain items and they are unwavering, unmoving on that. That's positional bargaining. It makes it very difficult to get bipartisan agreement on things because they really dug in their heels and they're represented very solidly by those positions. And that's not great when you're into that positional bargaining, when one side and the other side is dug their heels in so deeply. And then one side says, all right, no new taxes, no matter what, no new taxes. That's hard because there may come a situation where you need to put new taxes, but yet you've dug yourself into this trench, you backed yourself into this corner. It's hard to get out of that. So positional bargaining can have some downsides to it. Sometimes it's like where you have this absolute rigid bottom line without looking at some of the other things that may be opportunistic, that may change what the bottom line should be because of other opportunities that you didn't see when you came up with the bottom line. So these are things you have to be able to sort of see if you're getting yourself into one of those positions and sort of look outside yourself and recognize that and then tactically maneuver away from that. Or recognize that the other side is doing that and try to understand where they're coming from and see what you can do to change that position. So, as I said, you get locked in, you try to convince, and then the other thing is you try to push the other side to your view, and they're not going to have any part of it. So it's challenging when people are in those kind of positions. So when we think about negotiating styles, positional, and both the soft and hard kind of viewpoints on negotiations, you got participants are friendly, participants are adversaries. The goal is agreement, the goal is victory. You can kind of see how this plays out. Hard, be hard on the people, right? This one's be soft on the people and the problem. Trust others, mistrust others. Change your position, dig into your position. Make offers, make threats. You know what? Neither one of these is good, right? Neither one of these on this list here is good. If you're soft, the problem is you can be totally taken advantage of by a hard negotiator. If you have two soft negotiators, probably it can be reasonable, but very often you might be a soft negotiator and you get sort of really hammered by a hard negotiator. And then the next time, if you got to come to another contract agreement with that same party, you probably don't want anything to do with them. And so they lost because you don't want anything to do with them. You lost because you got on this project that you shouldn't have been on in the first place. So that's not the best way for long-term success in our industry. And also this one here, be hard on the people and the problem. That means you're making it personal. So you're making it personal on the other party. And that tends to have very negative long-term consequences. Just imagine you have a drywaller and they're taping the drywall and they didn't do that good a job. And you say to them, I don't know who trained you, but they could have been, they could have come out of school and could have been 5 years old and they could have taped better than you do. Meanwhile, it was the person's parent that trained them. And so now they're going to really take it personally. Much better. This is the problem. How are we going to fix it? And trying to bring people into it and not make them personally the problem. So you really have to think about things before you say things because it could be offensive and people could take it personally. We're only human and we're not perfect. So sometimes we make those mistakes. I make those mistakes, but you try to be cognizant of that and you try to minimize that. If you tend to be prone to that, try to develop certain skills and techniques that before you say something, maybe you calm yourself a little bit, or maybe you ask the other party a question to try to give yourself a little pause before you say something that's going to be regrettable. So neither are very good. There's what we call the balanced method, which is considered to be among the best methods to utilize. Usually things aren't all one way or the other way, so we have to look for something that's a balance. And the balanced method uses 4 areas. people. Separate people from the problems and don't make it personal. Interests, focus on interests, not positions. What is the other party really interested in, right? Options, is there other things we can think about to enhance this deal that we're working on or this negotiation that we're working through that we haven't considered in the past? Have we considered all the options? And criteria, insist that the result be based on something that we can measure. It's good if it's something that we can measure. So specifications are good if they're done well because they give tolerances of what's acceptable within a certain tolerance level. You know, how plumb has this wall got to be? It's got to be it's got to be within a quarter inch on 8 feet. Okay, well, at least I know. So there's something that you could measure. So when we think about separating people, as I said, don't make the drywaller who trained them the problem. Make the problem that the taping is not good enough to meet our standards. How do we fix it? And trying to get rid of that emotional element. If you get people's egos caught up in it, it becomes very emotional, and then it can become very sort of a shouting match or a stomping off kind of thing where you can't settle this agreement. And you've made it too personal that people just don't want to settle it. And that's where you can very often go to litigation and construction. We have no end of changes or design errors or omissions and delays that occur. And if we don't develop really good skills at negotiation, the only one that's going to win are lawyers, and you're leaving the judgment to the judge at the end of the claims issue. So this is a skill that can save literally tens of millions of dollars if somebody is really good at this and avoids those kind of litigation issues which go on for years and cost countless dollars that the legal teams tend to benefit the most from. So attack the problem, not the person. And we can even think about sometimes how we do that. It can be how we position ourselves. Probably a rectangular desk is not the best for this kind of negotiation. A round table is probably better, and you're sitting like side by side, maybe slightly angled, and then in the middle you got the drawings. In the middle you got the specifications. This is the problem. You're not the problem. You're not the problem. This is the problem. And that makes it a lot easier. Or in the drywall situation, it's the drywall. This is the problem. This here, can we fix this? How would you suggest we fix this? This is a much better tactic to take. And if you build a good working relationship with people and you understand the aspects that it's not all take and no give, that can be helpful as well. If you've done that ahead of time, it's really helpful. There's the story of Benjamin Franklin, and this was in his biography that was written a number of years back. And in his biography, it was stated that Benjamin Franklin, he was, in politics, obviously. And there was this, I guess he'd be a billionaire of the time, probably not billions at that time, but multi-millionaire. And this guy was active in politics, and for whatever the reason, he didn't like Benjamin Franklin. He was always talking behind his back. He didn't like him at all. And Benjamin Franklin could have taken an adversarial approach to him, stabbed him behind his back too every time. But instead, Benjamin Franklin, being the kind of the great communicator and negotiator that he was, took a different tactic. And he heard that this multimillionaire had books, had a library at home, personal library. And back then there was no public library. So he had this personal library back home. And he was very proud of it. And he heard he had a particular book. And Benjamin Franklin loved reading. He loved reading books. And so he heard he had this particular book that he wanted to read. And so he very politely went up to him one time and he said, "Oh, I heard you have this wonderful library. Would you mind lending me this book? I would love to read it. I've always wanted to read it." And the guy, who was very proud of his library and that sort of thing, "Oh, sure, you can read it." And he brought the book to him. And Benjamin Franklin was sincere. He didn't make up a book. He did want to read that book. And he did read the book. And then when he gave the book back, the guy asked him all kinds of questions about the book. And Franklin loved talking about it because he loved the writer of the book. And then they became the best of friends. And over time, they built this really, really strong relationship. And they were able to do a lot of successful things together. And it was one of those long-term, lasting relationships that you hear about. Another example that I find interesting like that is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, when he was a younger lawyer, Abraham Lincoln wasn't known as being the most eloquent dresser. He was a little bit disheveled at times. And he got this case, and it was through this lawyer of this really famous lawyer in the U.S. at the time. I think his name was Harry Stanton. I might have the first name wrong, but Stanton was the last name. And this lawyer, who was really good, he'd be like a Greenspan today, like out of Canada, if you want to look at it that way, was really, really good. And so his assistant lawyer gave Lincoln all this information about the trial that was coming up in Lincoln's hometown. Lincoln's hometown was Springfield, I think the same as Homer Simpson, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, so basically it was in the same hometown. It was in this small hometown. The main lawyer was from a big city, but the case was being tried there. And so Lincoln worked and worked on it and did a whole bunch of stuff and everything. And he showed up, and this really well-dressed lawyer looked at his assistant. Where'd you get this guy from, basically? Like, where'd you drag him up from? He can't sit in the court with us, right? And so basically they let him go. They took his stuff, whatever stuff he had prepped, but they let him go. And Lincoln was very upset personally. How would you take it? You'd take it very upset. I'd be upset, right? But then Lincoln thought, well, let's see what this guy is like. I'm going to stay in the court, sit in the audience, and see what this guy is. How good can this guy really be? And he sat there, and Lincoln said he watched him. And so Lincoln was able to keep an open mind. Most people after that, no matter what the guy does, they're going to be critical of him. But Lincoln was able to keep an open mind. And he said, wow, this guy is really good. I have to up my game. I have to get better. I have to do a lot more reading. I have to do a lot more work at my craft to become better at what I do. And of course, he did do that. And he eventually became President of the United States. Well, I forget if it was Secretary of State. It was one of those positions. And it came up. And it might have been Secretary of War at the time. But he wanted to get this, it's probably Secretary of State, he wanted to get this lawyer to be a Secretary of State. One of Lincoln's assistants said, that's the guy that insulted you. That's the guy that did all these things, right? And Lincoln said, much better to make an enemy my friend, right, than to keep him my enemy. And Lincoln actually did that with most of his cabinet. He filled his cabinet with people that he did not originally get along with. Right? And everybody was wondering, like, what are you doing? And it's funny, there was a biography that was written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it told this story in it. And Barack Obama read it after he got elected. And he phoned up Doris Kearns Goodwin, and he was asking a lot of questions about that aspect of Lincoln putting somebody in a key position like Secretary of State. And after he asked her all these questions about history and Lincoln and this and that, shortly after, he put Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State. So he was kind of like following that sort of process that we're talking about and trying to, because up to that point, they were adversaries going head to head in they were both running for the Democratic lead, and he won and she lost. But he thought she was the best person for the job. And despite everything else, he made sure he got her into that position. So build a working relationship. I'm just giving you some examples here. Sometimes it's amazing who you think you don't get along with or you can't get along with, that if you actually make an effort, you can. There was even a faculty member, I kind of took this on myself a number of years ago, and we were always butting heads over things. When I was coordinator, we were always butting heads. And one day I just thought, I'm going to really look at it from this other person's position. And you know what? I did look at it from their position, and I did, all of a sudden I had some clarity of understanding. It wasn't that they were wrong, and it wasn't that I was right. And I had a meeting with them, and we actually came to a mutual understanding of our viewpoints. And from that point on, we got along really well. Actually, just last weekend, I had a nice 2-hour conversation with him. So that's the way that you can be successful in construction business and in life when we're talking about these kind of things with negotiation. So, and negotiation is huge in construction. It really is something that you're doing on an ongoing basis. You got a subcontractor, you don't want to do something. If you're able to work with them and collaborate and get the same thing that you both really want at the end of the day, it starts to become that they actually like working with you and you like working with them, even though originally you might not have. And you have to think about the history they've had. Maybe with other project managers with your company, maybe with other project managers in other companies. And you have to understand that there's something that's probably led them to be the way that they are. So, negotiators that view themselves as adversaries find it difficult to separate the relationships from the problem. Key point there. Helps to sit on the same side. I've already kind of talked about that. Make the object the problem. Talked about that. Skills at discovery, really trying to pull out what are some of the other options. Maybe we don't know all the options. Maybe we haven't talked about them. Maybe we can sort of brainstorm and see if there's things that neither one of us see. Sometimes even asking people outside the negotiation circle may lead to some ideas that could be brought into the negotiation. I've seen this a number of times, where if you can make it a measurable standard, it's helpful. They used to always, with the college teachers and the college professors, they'd look at university pay rates, and they'd look at not only the university pay rates, but also the high school pay rates, and they'd say college professors should be somewhere in the middle. So, if university professors are at 150 and high school teachers are at 100, then college professors should be at 125, something like that, right? That would be some standard that would be like a benchmark that you could always measure against. And if you get an agreement, that can kind of make it a little bit easier to do those kind of negotiations. It's measurable, right? Things that are measurable, it's easier to manage, right? So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. You see how this stuff keeps intertwining in all these different topics that we talk about in the course. What if the other side is more powerful or just unreasonable? You're going to get that, right? You're going to get that. One of the things you got to be careful of is don't fall in love with the deal so much that you are like just giving into everything. So there's what they call Batna. And this has been one of the most useful things I've found over the years. It's best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what that means is before you go into the negotiations, have an alternative. If your only alternative is to have a deal at the end of the day and you get somebody that's more powerful or unreasonable, then you're stuck. You're going to probably collapse or cave. On the other hand, if you can figure out something that you've got another plan that you can invoke if this doesn't work, then that can be helpful. So in construction, it could be that if you can't get this trade to do what you need them to do, you've lined up another trade to take their place, or you've got somebody else that's going to fix this problem. So there's different avenues that you can look at for that. If you've got a best alternative to a negotiated agreement, it's really helpful in that aspect. If you're applying for a job and you already have a job, well, don't quit the job you have before you apply for the next job. It's so much easier because then it's kind of like you're interviewing them. You haven't given up. You're not like a deer in the headlights. Somebody else can see, well, this person doesn't have a job right now. They really need this work. So instead of paying them X amount of dollars, I'm going to pay them 10,000 less than X amount of dollars because I can see they need this job. So a hard negotiator would take advantage. They would seize that opportunity, right? But on the other hand, if you already got another job, okay, so do I want this job or do I not want this job? Makes a huge difference. I remember when I was acting director, and I'd done it 2 years, and time was up because I had to fully leave the union. Well, I was left the union, but I always had the choice to go back in teaching. And the dean at the time, this is going way back, the dean at the time was pretty hard-nosed negotiator, definitely a hard negotiator, 100%. And so pretty much the deal I was getting was lousy, and it wasn't any better than faculty. So why am I going to do this? And I always remember, because I tried to put a few things on the table, but I went in with a Batna. I had a Batna. And she said to me, well, Tom, you have to understand there's a reason why the coaches, managers, don't get paid as much as the players, professors. And made no sense to me, but anyways. And I said, yeah, but most coaches can't change their mind and be a player. I can. And so that's what I did. I went back to teaching. Here I am now. But I always remember that as a BATNA, best alternative to negotiation. I was struggling with having to feel like I had to accept that going into that meeting. But prior to, I really came to a resolution. Well, you know what? I do have an alternative. I've got a very good alternative. So I was very primed for that at that point in time. So BATNA is that sort of structure or setup. It's the same thing. You really understand that you go in to negotiate for a house and there's a bidding war going on. If you fall in love with the deal, you're going to get stuck and you're going to be pulled in that you might regret that later. If you fully understand that there's going to be another house next week that'll be for sale, you don't have to fall into that if you don't want to. Like you can get into a bidding war if you can see a result that makes sense to you, but don't get into it that you have buyer's remorse right afterwards. Those kind of things make a big difference. Another example, I've got too many examples on this one. I had when I was acting director too, I had hired a teacher part-time, and this teacher was retired. So number one, they probably were half in, half out whether they wanted to do it, but they were doing it. And then all of a sudden they decided they didn't like their pay rate. Well, in a big organization, I don't care if it's a construction company, what have you, they have certain pay scales and they don't like to play with pay scales because other people, it's not seen to be balanced. It doesn't seem to be fair that way. It's what we call procedural justice. They want to make sure the process is seen fair. So there's not much I could do with this teacher's pay, but they'd already taught 4 or 5 weeks and it was mathematics. They were a good teacher, so they were a very good teacher. So I'm sure the students liked the teacher very much. And then this teacher's threatening me that they're going to quit. And so I had a meeting coming up with them, and I was feeling kind of pressured because I don't want a teacher to leave a class, 5 classes in. The students, especially if the students like that teacher, they're going to be upset, and I'm sure they liked him. But I did before the negotiation, I went and I saw who I thought was the best math teacher that the college had. I knew that was the best math teacher that the college had. And I said, would you mind if this and this happens, taking on these 2 extra courses? And of course they get paid overtime or whatever. And he said, sure, I can do that. And so when I went into the meeting, I had a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This other teacher thought I was over a barrel, but I already had, all right, so if you want to leave, you can. So I was pretty polite about it, but they were pretty hard on me. And I was kind of sitting there and I was kind of I wasn't sweating. I wasn't upset about anything. And then I just basically said, well, I understand fully. If that's what you need to do, you need to do it. So just let me know, and then no problem. We'll remain on good terms. And he was shocked. He couldn't believe what I was saying. And so at the end of the day, he did then decide to continue and finish the course for the semester. But I couldn't have really felt that comfortable, if I didn't have a backup. So it was good to best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It helps a lot in negotiating. You remove that desperation side. So knowing the BATMA, it can be really helpful from those perspectives. Also, negotiations in construction contracts, we tend to have that we would have binding arbitration clauses in the contract, which typically means you go through a mediation process, an arbitration process, which avoids typical legal system aspects. So you can run through that and you can have that structured all the way across, and that will give you sort of that process from mediation to arbitration, and not going to the full legal system. But you know what? Arbitration these days is long and it's expensive too. Over time, it's gotten to be a little bit of a thing that you definitely want to avoid as well. Mediation, you can go through without it being too lengthy and too damaging, but binding arbitration does get into quite a cost and quite a lengthy discussion. So anything that you can do one-on-one with the parties that is involved and clarify, or within teams, and avoid that would be a strong suggestion to build those skills. So a lot of the material that I took from this little section comes from the work of William Ury. He led the Harvard research project on negotiation. I had the pleasure of seeing him present at Rotman a couple of years ago. I teach a course down at U of T, and Rotman always has speakers come in, which is kind of nice. And usually I'm down there, so it's very easy for me to go see them. And he was an excellent speaker, but you could look up, if this is an area where you feel you need to improve a little bit, or you want more information on this, because there's whole courses on negotiation that can be taught. There's all kinds of YouTube videos. He would be a good starting point for that, because he's been involved in all kinds of background research on negotiation, but he's been a frontline negotiator on mega political issues throughout the world. So I think he would be somebody that would be a good point person to reference on some of the skill sets that you need. The other thing that I would also say to you is, some people just avoid negotiating. Practice it. When hotels and everything become a thing again, you can, when you get a hotel, negotiate. When you go into, ask for, could I have a free upgrade for the room? People get afraid to ask things. Sometimes asking things and not getting them and getting used to that is very, very helpful. I've started doing that over the years, and I found that probably about 50% of the time I get a free room upgrade. If you never ask, you don't get it. They just put you in the room that whatever was booked. But if you ask for it, you get a lot nicer room, a lot nicer view, etc. Maybe you even ask for the free continental breakfast or whatever. Maybe it's not part of your deal. You ask for it, half the time I get it. So it's worth asking. There's this old adage in negotiation: if you don't ask, you don't get. But also it's a little bit how you ask. You got to be very professional, very nice, receptive, smile on your face. There's a lot of different ways that you can ask. My wife was a professional negotiator with a big bank, and so, as I probably alluded earlier in this discussion, I would have considered myself more a soft negotiator. She's not a hard negotiator. She takes a balanced approach, and she usually builds a pretty good relationship with whoever she's dealing with. And then if she sees that person can't help her or is not the right person, she'll try to escalate it to the next level up without offending that particular person. So we always used to sort of laugh when she would, we'd get a pie from Loblaws or something, and it's past the expiry date, and we'd drive back, and she would go in, and she'd negotiate, and we used to bet in the car, what's she going to come back with? Most people would just come back with a pie. No, she would come back with a pie and a $25 gift card and a tub of ice cream, because she'd say, well, yeah, it's the pie, but you guys shouldn't have this expired stuff on your shelves. And I had to drive all the way back here. There's my time. Like, she would spell things out to people to sort of try to get a little bit more. And it'd be amazing what you could get. Even last week at Loblaws, had to wait a long time and outside, and she does it all online, all these pickup orders that they come out to your car. And of course, she called them, and I said, my husband had to wait 35 minutes outside. Next thing you know, $30 gift card. But if you don't ask, you don't get. So negotiation, but you got to do it the right way too. If you're asking, if you're asking in the wrong way, you could be put like in their non-preferred customer list, and then maybe they're going to cut you from the store or something like that. That's not what you want. You want to build good relationships and collaborate and look for win-wins. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of background you didn't think about was much in construction. Construction is huge for negotiation. You're always running into these kind of issues that you're trying to work on. And you don't want to sink a relationship, but at the same time, you can't be soft and giving in all the time. So you got to see there's that balance that comes in there. So that's what I wanted to cover for today. And one of my more interesting lectures, I always find negotiation interesting because no matter where you are in the spectrum, you can relate because there's so many different things going on. And just a reminder to you, practice it, start asking for things. That's why some salespeople that maybe they even started in sales when they were like 18 and they did it for 2 or 3 years. They tend to have very good negotiating skills and selling skills because we're always selling and negotiating. So practice those and you will get better. Practice it with deliberate practice. After you do it, if you're not successful, ask yourself, what could I do again to make it better? And if you are successful, what went really well with that? What could I repeat with that? How could I tweak that to make it a little bit better? And if you do that on a constant basis, over time, you're going to get really excellent at it. So, Tom Stephenson signing off for now, and we will see you